There's this question's a two-part question. There's a, I know I'm not remembering this halacha correctly, the details of it, but something along the lines of if you have, let's say, 5 packs of meat, one of them's not kosher and they're all on label, they get mixed up, you can assume that you can eat them all. Again, I know I'm not correctly remembering that, but something along the lines of that. Now, the second part is, going with that logic, if the Torah lists 24 species of birds that are not kosher, so and we don't know which ones they are because translations got lost, out of the thousands of birds that there are, why can we not use that same logic and assume that all the birds are kosher?
Right, so this is actually a question that involves a lot of prior knowledge. First, the question that you're alluding to is a rule called following the majority. And that the case of the Mishnah is that if you have 10 stores in a city, and let's say 9 of them sell only kosher meat, and 1 of them sells non-kosher meat, and I find a piece of meat in the street, and I'm not sure if it came from the 9 stores or it came from the 10th store. So the halacha is you assume that anything that has been separated from its place of origin comes from the majority component. Right? So that is called going after rove. In other words, anything that's no longer in the place where it originated, it's separated. So I follow the principle of majority. L'maisa, there may be various rabbinic rules that if you find a piece of meat, you can't make that assumption rabbinically, but d'oraisa, you could do it. And not only if it's a 9 to 1 ratio, even if it's a 3 to 2 ratio, meaning, or even, or 2 to 1 ratio. There's 1 treif store, 2 kosher stores. I find a piece of meat, I say it comes from one of the 2 rather than the treif one, right? Now, so that's rule number 1 called hochenach HaRav, and that does not depend on 60 or whatever it is. This is a rule of simple majority. Now, there's a second rule that's the following. There's a difference between the way the Torah defines the kosher status of birds versus the way the Torah defines the kosher status of fish and other land animals. With respect to animals and fish, the Torah gives you definitive signs. The Torah says a land animal is kosher if it has split hooves and it chews its cud. That means it regurgitates what it swallows and brings it up again. And therefore, if it chews its cud, it's kosher. If it doesn't chew its cud, it's not kosher. For fish, we have another identification sign, and that is it has to have fins and scales. That's why shellfish are not kosher. They don't have scales. So those are called simanim, and as a result, we could readily determine, even if we found a newly discovered animal, we could readily determine is the animal kosher or not, because the Torah doesn't really give you a list. I mean, it does list it, but the list is not important. It is the signs that are important. Birds is a very, very different situation. The Torah does not tell you what makes birds kosher or not kosher. The Torah basically says you can eat birds except for the following list. So it lists a list of very few, like 24 birds, and it says these birds are not kosher, and all other birds are kosher. The problem is, of course, that in the course of time we have uncertainty of translation and exactly what species the Torah is talking about. Theoretically, if we knew exactly, we would know. Which means I can tell you ahead of time, there are definitely many, many more species of birds that you could eat than we actually do eat. And because of these doubts, we don't eat birds unless we have traditions, and Chazal have given us various identification signs, which are not in the Torah itself, such as, it's not a bird of prey or whatever it is. So your question is, given the fact that it is unquestionably the case that the vast majority of birds are kosher, whether we know it or not, and only the minority of birds in the world are treif, and the only problem is we don't know if that minority, if any given bird is from the minority or from the majority. That's really the issue, unless we have the definitive signs that the sages gave us. So your question is, why can't I apply the same principle that I apply towards the meat, in which if I don't know if the bird comes from the majority or the bird comes from the minority, I assume it comes from the majority, just as the piece of meat. If I don't know if it came from the treif stores or the kosher stores, I assume that it comes from the kosher store. Right? Very excellent question. Why don't I use that to allow myself to eat peacock or whatever? Well, peacock's probably kosher, but different birds that I don't know if they're kosher. Yeah, do you know what I'm saying?
Seventh-Day
No, I'm sorry. I didn't answer the question yet. Yeah, I thought you had an answer. Yeah. It is a very good question. What's interesting is this. I mean, this would be a kind of a technical answer, and that is, in order to apply this rule only applies when it has been separated from its place of origin, not through intentional action, meaning I find a piece of meat. The Mishnah says, for example, if I went into a store and I don't remember which store I went into, I cannot follow. Again, I can't give you a logical reason for it, but this is the Halacha Moshe Sinai. In such a situation, since my encounter with the Isser was not when it was separated, but when it was within the mixture, so as a result, you go with 50. It's treated halachically as a 50-50, where you have to be strict. So it turns out that I basically have to, the birds have not been separated, so to speak, because the world becomes their place. It's not like there's a store. So because of that, because of the rule of what's called kavua, I would have to treat it like a 50-50 doubt. But it is an excellent question. However, I will say I think there's another approach too, and you have to understand the following. When Chazal say we have a tradition that kosher birds have to have certain identifying signs, they're actually telling me something about the translation as well. They're basically telling me, we may not know exactly what those birds are, but we know that those birds don't have these identifying signs. So the most your argument could prove is that if I have a bird with identifying signs that I haven't eaten before, maybe I should assume it's from the majority. But if it doesn't have those signs, that's not a suffix anymore. Chazal are telling me that is a non-kosher bird. You see what I'm saying? So Chazal did have a common denominator of signs that tell you if it's kosher or not. Yeah.
What are the halachas on gambling and sports betting?
Yeah, what are the halachos of gambling and sports betting? So here is the problem. The Gemara says there are two different halachic problems with gambling and betting. We'll treat them as the same. Problem number one is a rule that is called asmachta. Asmachta is any type of commitment that you're making on the assumption that it won't come to pass. Meaning, when I make a bet, I'm making an assumption that I'll win the bet. I'm making the assumption my team is going to win. So in such a situation, there's an opinion that says that even if you lose, the other guy is not allowed to collect the money because he's stealing from me because I never really intended to give it to him. By the way, it's not only betting. This is true for penalty clauses. Let's assume that I agree to paint your house. And the contract says that if I don't finish the job by March 5, I will pay you a penalty of $10 a day for every day that I don't. A penalty clause. A penalty clause is not enforceable halachically because it's an asmachta. I didn't figure I would lose. So one opinion says that all betting is forbidden because of asmachta. There's another opinion that says that betting is prohibited because it is not a constructive activity. It is not contributing to the building of the world in a positive way. Now the Gemara says, or the Shulchan Aruch says, there's a nafkamina, there's a difference between asmachta and yeshuvo shel olam, and that is, asmachta would prohibit even a single bet. In other words, betting is a prohibited activity. Gambling is a prohibited activity. If you collect on a gambling debt, you are a thief. That's the first interpretation. Like the second interpretation, that it's a non-productive, parasite-like activity, it would only be prohibited if that is your main parnasa. Meaning, if that's not how you live, you just do it on the side, it would actually be mutter. That's a tremendous kula, right? In other words, according to the second interpretation, occasional gambling would be okay as long as it's not your main living. So there's a machlokus in halacha if we go with the reason of asmachta or we go with Yeshuva Shel Olam. So there is a halachic basis, particularly for Ashkenazim. Sephardim would be more strict. There is a halachic basis to permit sporadic, occasional sports betting. And again, it's a very technical area because some differentiate between stam betting and actually putting your money on the table, meaning in a pot. Some say if you put your money on the pot and you separate yourself from your money, then you do understand you may lose the money, meaning they differentiate between stam, I bet I'll pay you if I lose, versus the money goes in the pot. So the truth of the matter is there is certainly a halachic basis to permit occasional betting where money is put into a pot. But the poskim say that it is a bad habit. It is an addictive habit. In fact, I'm not saying every sports betting you're going to be an addict, but gambling addiction is a reality. It actually is a reality, as strange as it would be. I once spoke at Chabad in Las Vegas. And it's interesting, you go to Las Vegas, I don't know if you've been to Las Vegas. Las Vegas has a frum community. There are day schools. Las Vegas is not like totally crazy. There actually is a nice Orthodox, at least there was, I haven't been there for a while. There's a nice Orthodox community in Las Vegas. But one thing I'll tell you, in the airport, in the bathrooms, there are slot machines. In the bathrooms, because you're coming there. So the Chabad Shaliach tells me that he gets a lot of calls from religious guys who kind of go there for a weekend. And he says a Hasidic guy calls him up. I mean, it's not funny, it's tragic. He says, I don't know what to do. He says, I just lost my house. I don't know how to tell my family. I was gambling and I was on a winning streak, so I decided to up the ante, and I gambled away my house. So when I get home, I got to tell my family we have no place to live. I mean, it sounds like ludicrous, but it is a very, very serious addiction, so by and large, it's better not to get into it.
According to the first interpretation,
Yeah.
the stock market be like the same price?
So that's the real question, like any interpretation. So the stock market, it is said, is just considered to be like business, like any business. You may win, you may lose. But I think the second reason is even more problematical, meaning you're not doing anything productive with your money. Well, in other words, unlike a business where you buy and you sell things, all you're doing is transferring wealth. I mean, stock speculations seem to be exactly the same thing. I mean, you're not building an industry, you're not building a business, you're simply speculating on prices. It is actually very difficult to truly say what is the difference between stock investing and pure gambling. But some have said that there is an economic difference in the sense that the secondary markets in securities affect the primary market. Again, what I mean is by this. Let's assume that somebody is making a business where they manufacture cars or widgets or computers or whatever it would be. Now, obviously, they're doing something constructive because they're selling objects to the public that the public uses. Now, even though it's true that the people that buy and sell their stock later are not really doing anything but simply financially gambling on the price of stock, but in truth, the better the price of the stock is in the markets later, the more the business will be able to raise its own capital by issuing stock. So in a sense, what is called the secondary markets do affect the primary ability of a business to raise capital, and therefore it becomes a productive activity because it enhances the ability of a business to make its computers or make its widgets. But that's complicated a little bit to try to figure that out. Yeah.
Seventh-Day Adventist Christians are trying to fulfill their interpretation of the Hebrew Bible by keeping the Sabbath on Saturday. Thus, we could say that they're giving more respect to Torah mitzvos than more Christians do. Nevertheless, Hazal states that going to keep or even emulate Shabbos or Chayav Misa. How are Seventh-Day Adventists judged in Shemayim for trying to keep more of the Torah mitzvos?
Yeah, so the question becomes, on one hand, we have a Christian group that is called Seventh-Day Adventists, and they believe that the Sabbath of God should be kept on Saturday like we do rather than Sunday, so they refrain from stuff on Saturday. And it looks, you would think that that's kind of a righteous act because they're trying to follow the Torah in a more accurate way. And yet Chazal say exactly the opposite. Chazal say that a non-Jew is not allowed to keep the Shabbos. And in fact, a non-Jew who keeps the Shabbos is chayav misa. We actually don't kill him at Basin, but in God's book, the person is chayav misa. So where does that put the Seventh-Day Adventist? So first of all, let me just point out that your question is not limited to a Seventh-Day Adventist. The rule that a guy, at least according to the Rambam, a guy cannot keep a day as Shabbos would apply even if a guy kept Sunday like Shabbos. Although that's a machlokas, I don't want to say that's pasha, but some say it's not just Shabbos, but it's any particular day. A guy should not have a day of rest. But a second point that moves the other way around is that the rule that a guy is not supposed to keep Shabbos refers only to a full Shabbos of 24 hours, number one, and with all of the details of the Lamed Tes Malachos. I can assure you that there is no Seventh-day Adventist that has learned Rabbi Ribiad's book of the 39 Malachos and will not turn on a light. So what they're doing is they are keeping the Sabbath by refraining from going to work and the like, but they're not transgressing Chazal's edict. So the question is, okay, so they're not in trouble. Are they doing something good, though? Are they doing something good, or are they doing something worthless? Meaning, they're not committing a sin in the eyes of God. Okay, that's good. But is there some spiritual mila to what they're doing? So here, let me point out a very interesting ha'ara from a Rav, a very chashuv Talmid Chacham in Yerushalayim, who was nifter maybe last year, 2 years ago. Rav Yoel Schwartz, Zechrono Livracha, was very involved in many, many things. And this is only one of his activities, but he was involved in Bnei Noach, in the chinuch of Bnei Noach, of Goyim, who wanted to keep the 7 commandments. And he made the point that it's entirely appropriate for a non-Jew to honor Shabbos in various ways. He felt a non-Jew should have a meal in honor of Shabbos. A non-Jew should study the biblical passages about God creating the world. A non-Jew should honor Shabbos because, after all, Shabbos commemorates a universal event that, God created the world in 6 days and God rested. So even if it's true that a non-Jew cannot make Shabbos exactly the way Jewish people make it, because that's called theft from the Jews, because Shabbos is the gift that God gave to us, but certainly honoring Shabbos is a virtuous activity even for a non-Jew. And as a result, the Seventh-day Adventists are not only not guilty of the sin of keeping Shabbos, which they're not because they're not doing the Lamed Tes Malachos completely, but it seems that what they're doing is spiritually virtuous because they're acknowledging that this is the commemoration of Hashem creating the world. By the way, this rule that a non-Jew is not supposed to keep Shabbos totally actually means that if you are a guy, a person's a guy who is converting to Judaism, so obviously he's going to be keeping commandments before the conversion in order to get into the habit of doing it. But every Shabbos he has to do one malacha. So even if he's keeping Shabbos, he has to be careful when he goes to the bathroom or something, he turns on the light in order to be mechalel Shabbos. He's mechuyev to be mechalel Shabbos in at least one way. Of course, this is they tell the story about the very, very devout convert in a yeshiva who was much more religious, much more frum than everybody else. And, people got a little upset, like, who does he think he is? He's such a big tzadik. So somebody went over to him and said, you think you're so frum, you think you're such a tzadik, you should know every single Shabbos you're committing. I'm sorry, I don't mean a ger. He's a guy. He was practicing for conversion. He was not a ger yet. He was a guy. But he was still firmer than everybody else. So they went over to him. He was a guy. He was a non-Jew. And they said, you think you're so righteous. Every single Shabbos, you commit Avera after Avera because you keep Shabbos so completely and so meticulously. It says, you're over on Chazal's statement that a guy who keeps Shabbos is chayav misa. Right? So don't think you're such a tzaddik. So the non-Jew looked at the guy and says, oh, no, don't worry about it. I carry in your Erev. Which means I'm mechalel Shabbos every week. So, So that's an interesting question. Does he have to be machmir and bedavka do something that l'chuli alma is a malacha, or can he be makel and say, I carry in the erev, that's chilul Shabbos? Yeah.
Here's a send-in. I read a story about someone who told the kiruv rabbi that on Friday night he makes kiddush, and the rabbi shared with him how much simcha there is in Shemayim that he makes kiddush. This inspired him to keep Shabbos fully. In my own journey to Yiddishkeit, I would hear things like this from rabbis, but at a certain point, when I became frum enough, I stopped hearing about how great what I was doing was, and started hearing all about how I'm not doing enough and need to do more.
Yeah.
Are there any sefarim I could learn that will help me appreciate what I'm already doing and see the depth and beauty of it? For example, where did this rabbi get the idea of the great simcha and Shemayim over kiddush?
Yeah. So the question becomes that this person in his journey to Judaism said that at one point he wasn't that observant at all, but he did kiddush, and then he was mechal Shabbos, and the rabbi says, that's great, that's wonderful, Hashem gets so much simcha in what you're doing, and etc. But then as he gets more mainstreamed, all of a sudden it turns into, hey, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing this? Yeah, well, this is the journey that, we've all been there, and I'm sure you've gone through a lot. You get welcomed, etc. So the truth of the matter is, though, the emes is both ideas are true. I mean, they're not, they seem contradictory, they are not. The emes is every single mitzvah you do counts tremendously. If a mechal Shabbos goes to the trouble of making kiddush, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, wonderful. And that doesn't go away. That's going to be true at every level. At the same time, a human being, a yid, is expected to grow. We're not supposed to be complacent. So the question becomes, are you ready for the challenge? That's it. Now I understand, every time a person is challenged, they're wondering, gee, yesterday life was so easy, and now it's so hard. But the answer is, you got to go on. You have to go on. So I understand the person's frustration that he's not getting necessarily the touchy-feely stroking that he got at an earlier stage. But maybe that's because he's ready for challenges. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't give people the chizuk that they were gotten before, but at some point, you get more mature, and you have to go on. I mean, a 5-year-old might get praised for tying his shoes. Wow, you really tied your shoes today. Great, fantastic. When you're 25-year-old, you're not going to tell mom if you're living at home. Mom, your mother is criticizing you for something. Mom, look at my shoes. I tied them today. Says, wow, that's great. So it's kind of that thing. But if you want to know the idea of sources of I don't know if he's asking specifically about Kiddush or generally, I'd have to think of, this is something that's, it's very, very, very common. These are things that are in many, many Sfarim. But I would suggest that he look in Hasidic books that talk about the joy HaKadosh Baruch Hu has when Klal Yisrael does mitzvos, and the great love that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has for every single mitzvah that we do. But I can try to send you, and you can send it on to the person, some more literary sources. But the truth is, the Chavis HaLevavos writes, there is no such thing as a mitzvah that is so small that HaKadosh Baruch Hu does not get tremendous joy in it. I think I told you the story, and forgive me for repeating it. Years ago, I used to be involved with NCSY. I was kind of an advisor, or an advisor to the advisors of NCSY. And Motzei Shabbos, they have a kumsitz. Everybody comes together, and it's over the years it got structured to perfection. It was, you're in a dark room, and there's music playing, and people get up, teenagers who are very emotional anyway, and they tell their life stories, and it's very moving. It can really bring you to tears. So I remember a girl got up, because NCSY is a co-ed institution. A girl got up and she started saying that she comes from a home where her parents don't even let her keep Shabbos. They're totally against religion. So what she does is 11 o'clock at night, she goes into the bathroom and she fishes out some hidden Shabbos candles. And she lights the Shabbos candles Friday night in the bathroom. And then she turns on the fan so her parents won't be able to smell the smoke. And she makes the bracha in the bathroom and blows out the candles and turns on the fan. And, that's how she does her Shabbos every Friday night when she's not at a Shabbaton. Now, you could give, if you were testing for smicha, you could give this as a case and say, how many averos did this girl commit? Like, list all the halachos that she violated and the other halachos, like a bracha in the bathroom, that she violated. So this is full of averos, right? So you can look at this in two ways. I can look at it and say, ay, veis mir, what a sinner. How many averos did she do? Okay. On the other hand, you're looking at a young girl who is living in a very hostile environment vis-a-vis Shabbos, and she's doing her best to keep Shabbos l'shem shamayim. Who knows? Maybe Hashem considered what she did greater than the comfortable Shabbos that we can keep in Yerushalayim without any types of challenges. See, Hashem looks at the challenges that a person has, not just at the external act. So all of this would enter into the picture. But as I say, it is true that a lot of times, as we grow in our Yiddishkeit, more is expected of us. But that's the normal process of maturation, right? More is expected of a 25-year-old than of a 5-year-old, and the 25-year-old can't be expected to kind of stay at the level of a 5-year-old. So you have to grow and you have to move. Yeah.
So I've noticed, and forgive me if I remember incorrectly, but I've noticed that generally when Hashem is promising Avraham, just the things that he's promising with the covenant, he pretty much exclusively, or at least mostly, promises him olam hazeh, so many children and land and wealth, and which kind of seems like something Avraham wouldn't care much about at all. Why isn't Hashem promise Avraham more spiritual wealth and rather than physical?
Right, so the question is, again, I was asked to repeat the question. The question is that when Hashem promises Avraham all sorts of blessings, they are always in the nature of physical blessings, whether it's Eretz Yisrael, children, wealth, parnasa. And since Avraham was such a righteous person, he surely does not care so much about the material world. Why doesn't Hashem talk about Olam Haba and the like? Now the emes says, let me just add to your question. Your question is not only about Avraham, your question is about the Torah as a whole. If you look at Shema, when the Torah says, if you keep my mitzvos, I will do good things for you, the only thing the Torah talks about is this world. The Torah never even talks about Olam Haba. All of the reward in the Torah is gashmias, physicality, wealth, health, children, success, right? But there are a few answers. It's a very excellent question. There are a few answers to that. But one answer might be that in reality, maybe the premise is incorrect. The premise that, why would Avraham care about Olam Hazeh? The answer is, well, intrinsically, he probably didn't care about Olam Hazeh. But Olam Hazeh is the environment in which you can do mitzvos. Olam Hazeh, with health and with wealth and with children, you're able to sanctify God's name and glorify God's name. When you're dead and you're getting reward, that's a wonderful thing. But you're no longer able to do mitzvos. So the truth is, a tzadik very much cares about living in this world, not because of the gashmias, not because of the physicality, but because of the opportunity to serve Hashem. They say the Vilna Gaon, on his deathbed, the Vilna Gaon died Chol HaMoed Sukkos. The Vilna Gaon died during Sukkot. He was crying because he took his tzitzis and he said, this world is so precious. Tzitzis cost whatever they cost, a few kopecks, whatever it would be. And through this tzitzis, you can accomplish things that you would not be able to do in the world to come. Right? So in that sense, it's not like we downgrade this physical world. This physical world is the place where I serve Hashem. In fact, somebody told me it's a very frightening dream in a way that a mother, not in connection with the army, but a mother had lost a son a few years ago. And she told me that her son came to her in a dream. And he said this, he said that, Baruch Hashem, it's very good up there, Olam Haba is very good. But there's like a sadness because there's like this glass partition in which you see down into this world, and you like see everybody doing good things, and you so much want to do those good things, and you can't do them anymore. It's really a little bit. He says, and that's the sadness that exists within Olam Hazeh, within Olam Haba, of lost opportunity. You see? So that's why it's expressed that way. The greatest blessing God can give you is the conditions that will give you the opportunity to serve Him. Yeah.
I heard from some Usher Rebbe. They said that apparently that Saint Peter was really a tank, and that Chazal sent it out so that he could be geyser that for the Christians that Shabbos should be or Sunday, so they shouldn't make design out of Shabbos. So that was the thing that Saint Peter was a geyser for the Christians. You know anything about this?
Yes, I spoke about this, Sarah B'Teves, so I don't want to be marach, but I'll go over it very, very quickly. Peter's name was Shimon Kippah, Simon the Rock. Kippah is rock in Aramaic, and indeed, under the Christian tradition, his name was Shimon, Simon, and Yashka called him Peter, you're my rock. So Simon Peter is Shimon Kippah, and there is a medrash that says that Shimon Kippah was a very righteous person. He was a tzadik. He was a Jew. Of course, even the Christians say he was Jewish. And he wanted to separate Christianity from Judaism because the early Christians were all Jews. They were davening in our shuls, and they were spreading their poison. And he said, I will separate them. I will make them a separate religion. They'll make Shabbos a different day. There'll be churches, etc. And I will do this, and I will pretend that I'm not Jewish anymore. I will draw them out. And in that way, I will save Klal Yisrael from the negative influence of Christians by separating them out. And his kavana was l'shem shamayim. And he said, I know I will never be able to live as a Jew again, but I'm doing this to save the Jewish people. And the Medrash says that Shimon Kippah, in private, he was the first pope. Simon Peter is the first pope. He was the bishop of Rome, and he was the leader of the church after Yashka died. And it says that B'tzina, privately, he kept mitzvos. He wore tefillin and the like. And according to some, tzadikim fasted on the 9th of Teves, in addition to the 10th of Teves, because that was his yahrzeit, and they wanted to honor his memory. And according to some, he is even the author of Nishmas that we recite on Shabbos. Now, there is something called a medrash that says this, but I need to point out that this medrash is not one of the official midrashim, like Medrash Rabbah, Medrash Tanchuma, so it does not necessarily have the authority of Chazal, and some say it's a Baba Maisa, and even the statement that Shimon Kippah wrote Nishmas is quoted in Machzor Vitri, which is written by the Talmidim of Rashi, but the Machzor Vitri itself says it's Sheker V'Chazab. So what you were told and what I mentioned, there is sources for, but some say they are not reliable sources. So we don't really know. But that's the fascinating story of Shimon Kippah. Yeah.
Can you talk about the power, like what's the power of saying Tehillim, and what should we have in mind, and what can we gain from saying all of Tehillim?
Yeah, the power of Tehillim. Tehillim is a tremendous, tremendous treasure. The Brisker Rav used to say, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us diamonds, and the diamonds are Sefer Tehillim. The Ramchal writes that one of the ways a person develops a deep relationship with Hashem is to be ragil, to be habituated in the words of David HaMelech. Now, Tehillim expresses every kind of human emotion that can exist. If you look at Tehillim, there are Tehillim of joy and gratitude and simcha, jubilation, redemption, triumph. And then there are many chapters of Tehillim that are sad, despondent, fearful, anxious. And on one level, David HaMelech's Tehillim are written because of the events in his life, so they have a personal autobiographical aspect. But because they were written with Ruach HaKodesh, they are also referring to the things that happen to Klal Yisrael in the future and the things that happen to every individual, which means Tehillim has both what you might call a particularistic aspect, meaning something happened in David's life that caused this Tehillim to be written, but it also has a universalistic aspect. So the emphasis, the importance of Tehillim can be seen that Chazal were masakein, that every single day in davening, Psukei de Zimra are from Tehillim, right? So every single day we say Tehillim and the Shir Shal Yom and the like. But Tehillim can be divided that you finish it every week, or it can be divided in shorter sections, you finish it every month. And it says it opens up the gates of heaven. It connects you to Hashem. It opens up the gates of heaven. It destroys the powers of evil that try to undermine you in various ways. So it's a very, very wonderful thing for a person to be ragil to read Tehillim. The problem is that Tehillim is not an easy book because it's better to understand what you're reading, right? Obviously, that's good. But even if you take a translation of Tehillim, whether it's an art scroll or Rav Hirsch, sometimes, you don't always have a sense of what these verses mean, and it's sometimes hard to see a continuity, which is a big problem, between one verse and another verse. I have this pasuk, then I have this pasuk, like what exactly is it saying? So it's something that you got to study a little bit. Someone sent me, they just finished, so maybe in a few months it'll be published. They finished a 3-volume work on Tehillim, which tries to show you, the connections and retranslated them. So this is Rabbi Avraham Sutton, who's a very, very eminent person. He's a Talmud Chacham, a Makubal as well. So look for his 3-volume Tehillim that will be coming out, a little commercial for him. But the Ramchal writes in Mesilas Yesharim that Tehillim is one of the most powerful ways that you develop a relationship with Hashem. And indeed, a great guy like Rav David Feinstein, and I always advertise his biography as such a great biography. He would get up like early before davening, and he was learning Shas and Poskim the whole day, but he always had a half an hour where he just said Tehillim. That was how he started his day to kind of ensure that all of his avodah was connecting himself to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Yeah.
In Gemara Kedushin, it's brought down that if I send someone to do a sin on my behalf, I'm not liable. So if I send X to physically assault Y, nothing happens to me unless the person I'm sending is insane, because then I'm taking advantage of them. If they're intelligent, I don't get any sin, and this is an inverse to the mitzvah where I can send a shliach and get the reward. And the reason behind this is because there's no legal framework where the person I'm sending is a shliach. So my question is, because there's an exception for this, which is idolatry. So why is that an exception where I can send someone like, I don't get the sin, and are there exceptions?
Yeah. So the rule you're referring to is a very, very famous rule, Ein Shaliach Lidvar Aveira, meaning I can make a shaliach, I can make an agent, I can make a messenger to marry a woman for me, although we don't tend not to do that today. I can make a shaliach to deliver a get to a woman, which we in fact do even today if husband and wife are in different countries. I can make the rabbi or anybody a shaliach to sell my chametz to a guy. Halacha recognizes the principle of agency. There are many, many things you can do via an agent. In mitzvos, to some degree, although it's not exactly the same, somebody can make kiddush for me, although that's not exactly the same as pure shalichus, but it's a notion of proxy. You're doing the mitzvah by proxy. But when it comes to aveira, I'm just repeating your question, when it comes to sin, right, I make you a shaliach to murder somebody, a hitman. I make you a shaliach to steal for me. I make you a shaliach to desecrate the Shabbos. So even though normally the rule should be whatever the agent does is my action, but when it comes to sins or crimes, it is only the actor. See, it's very different than secular law. Under secular law, if I hire somebody to assassinate someone, I'm the one that's going to be more guilty even than the guy who carried out the crime. In halacha, I'm off the hook. The only guy that's obligated is the guy that pulled the trigger, because there is no concept of agency. There is no concept of shaliach for crimes. The action of the criminal is his action. It is not considered to be my action. Now, the Talmud says that is for a logical reason, and that is the shaliach shouldn't have listened to me. Divrei HaRav, Divrei HaTalmud, the words of the master, God, and the words of the disciple, the guy who sent me, Divrei Mishamin, who are you supposed to listen to? You had no right to listen to an illegal, sinful act, and therefore you bear your own responsibility. So this is a well-known principle that there is no concept of agency when it comes to sinful behaviors, although it's a little tricky. Even the statement of the rule is a little ambiguous. Well, what if it's a sin for me, but it's not a sin for you? For example, I'm a Kohen, and I make you a shaliach, and you're not a Kohen. I make you a shaliach to be makadesh, to marry a divorced woman on my behalf. Is that called agency to commit a sin? It's a sin for me to marry a divorced woman, but it's not a sin for you. So do I look at it from the perspective of the mishaleach, the one that is designating the agent, or do I look at it from the perspective of the shaliach? Okay, but be it as it may, the Gemara in Kedushin discusses exceptions. There are exceptions to this rule. There are certain sins in which shalichus does apply, and as a result, the mishaleach will bear responsibility for the action of the shaliach. We don't necessarily have a logic for that. This is derived from biblical verses, but one of them is me'ila. What is me'ila? Me'ila is the prohibition of benefiting from property that was sanctified to the Beis HaMikdash. If somebody sanctified gold and silver to the temple, and I went ahead and I spent some of that money, there is a sin called me'ila where you got to bring a korban. So let's assume I told you, go and spend this sanctified money and buy a kiddush, buy food for me, whatever it would be. So even though you're the guy that spent the money, for me, I'm going to be chayav because me'ila is yesh shaliach lidvar avera. Again, the Gemara has psukim. And the other is, interestingly enough, the rule of tevicha and mechira. The Torah says if I steal an ox and I shecht it, so I'm chayav the penalty of 5 times. I don't just pay double, I got to pay 5 times the value of the ox. Well, what if I didn't shecht it, I stole the ox, and I told you to shecht it for me? The halacha is I'm still chayav 4 and 5 based on yesh shaliach l'dvar avera for dalet. So there are exceptions, but as I say, the rule is generally ein shaliach l'dvar avera. Now the Gemara does say that not everybody agrees with that because Shammai himself maintains there is shalichus, and he proves it from the story of David and Bathsheba. Because if you remember, David sent Uriah, Bathsheba's husband, to the front to get him killed. And Uriah Hachiti got killed fighting the Ammonites. And Nasan Hanavi said to David, you, David, are guilty of killing him through the sword of the Ammonites. So Shammai argues, hey, what do you mean? David didn't kill him. He kind of made the Ammonites shaliach to kill him. So Shammai actually says, if you hire a hitman, you are chayav because of yesh shaliach lidvar avera. But we paskin like Hillel that ain't shaliach lidvar avera. But the Musar still says that in God's book, in God's heavenly book, you are responsible. So ain't shaliach lidvar avera is bidei adam. We as a Beis Din will not punish you for the sin that your shaliach committed, but in God's book you will be accountable. So there is a chiluk between what is called bidei adam and bidei shamayim.
What is the basis for not learning on Nittelnacht, and does that apply nowadays?
Yeah. So this is, I hate to be mezalzel in Minhagim Yisrael, but if you're going to drop something, this is the one that you should drop. Nittelnacht is a designation for the Kratzmach, for the Christmas Eve, the night of December 24th. And there was a minhag in certain places. There is a minhag among certain groups, mainly Hasidim, that they would not learn Torah the night of Christmas. They would not learn on the night of Christmas. They would play cards or whatever it would be. Now the question becomes, what's the reason for that? Like, why should you not learn Torah? I mean, not learning Torah is a very, very serious thing, and you normally try to avoid that. So there are two different explanations. One is a historical explanation, which wouldn't apply today that much. The other is more of a mystical explanation. The historical explanation was that Christmas night was a very dangerous night for Jews in Poland to wander the streets, because they might get assaulted by a pogrom, they might get killed. So as a result, it wasn't so much they weren't allowed to learn, but they were told not to go to the Beis Medrash. Don't go to the Beis Medrash that night, because walking in the street from your house to the Beis Medrash would be very, very dangerous. What then happened was, according to this historical explanation, that people at home, they were at home, so they didn't learn. In other words, according to this, there never was an intention not to learn. It was simply a directive that because of sakana, don't go to the Beis HaMedrash, and then it degenerated into not learning. That's historical explanation. Now, a chassid who keeps this minhag will not tell you that reason, but I think Lamaisa that may have a lot of truth to it. The more Kabbalistic reason that's given is that since this was the night in which Oso Ha'ish may have come into the world, so you, by learning, when you learn, you add holiness and you add strength, you add spiritual strength. You don't want to add spiritual strength to that power which was an evil power, and therefore we don't want to give it a koach. Now, the problem with that is that's an enormous problem, because number one, when you have rishus coming into the world, your learning of Torah is not strengthening the rishus. Your learning of Torah is weakening the rishus. In other words, mehechi teisi, that when I learn Torah, it's going to add koach to something bad. The other way around, it creates a protection. And the second question is, why on earth would that depend on a secular birth date? Christmas Eve, even if it's accurate, which it may not be accurate, December 24, that's not Yashka's Hebrew birthday. In fact, I mentioned, some say his Hebrew birthday is the 9th of Teves. So if you're going to tell me on the day that Yashka was born, you shouldn't add Kedusha because you're strengthening the forces of Tumah, then that Isser should apply not on a secular date. That Isser should apply on whatever the Hebrew date. I mean, Mehechi Teisa, you would use a secular date for determining the kochos of Tumah in the world. So I don't want to argue with the Minhagim that some people have, but by and large, we don't follow that particular minhag. One should learn. Yeah.
Here's another send-in. Is it allowed by halacha for a Jew to dress up as Santa and give out candies and wishes to kids?
Wow. Yeah. Are you allowed? Are you allowed to dress up as Santa Claus and give out candy to children? On one hand, you could say, "Wow, it's a very nice thing, Kiddush Hashem, and you're being friendly and nice to people." So this is very, very tricky, and really the question becomes secular versus religious, and that is, well, let me draw an analogy for a moment. Something like Halloween. Now it's interesting how things change. I mean, I grew up in Connecticut, and I went to a religious school, but in my day, even kids who were Shomer Shabbos, we used to go trick-or-treating. Right? It was something that Halloween in those days was considered to be like Thanksgiving, although Thanksgiving was also a problem, but Thanksgiving, and we just celebrated it, and any day that you got candy was a good day. And those were more innocent times. They didn't put razor blades, in the apples, or poison in the Hershey's. So in those days, kids would walk around at night, by themselves. They didn't have to have an armed guard, following them. And we went trick-or-treating, and we got candy. Of course, the kashrus is another issue. In those days, too, people just used to read ingredients, and they didn't always even look at hashgachas, which was a little unfortunate. So is a Jew allowed to go, is a frum kid allowed to go trick-or-treating? So some say, hey, it's just a shtus, there's no religious significance, there's no connection to any religious thing at all, and therefore it's just a thing. Others say, fakert, it was rooted in paganism. Halloween was rooted in pre-Christianity, pagan rituals around that time of year. Now, Santa Claus may, on some level, fall under the same type of category. Yes, Santa Claus is Saint Nicholas, a saint of the church, and you're dressing like a saint of the church. But Santa Claus has become a secular symbol, just a symbol of, a nice guy giving out stuff. So one might assume, I'm thinking out loud, that maybe there is such a heter. But Lamaisa, I would say that the few people that have spoken about it have said no, that he is still a saint of the church, whatever that means. And Santa Claus is associated with a day that has a religious significance for many people. Right? Everyone sees St. Nicholas, they think, or Santa Claus, they think Christmas. You think Christmas, you think Yashka. So as a result, I think it would be very, very improper for a religious Jew to kind of embrace, endorse, and assume the identity of a symbol and a person that is bound with a holiday that celebrates idolatry. So although as I go through the svaros, you can see there is theoretically a basis to be lenient, it would not be proper to do that. Yeah.
On sort of a similar note, I guess. So I'm Russian, and growing up...
Is that Russian, you said?
Russian,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Growing up, a big thing was Novy God, which means New Year. And unlike New Year in most of the world, which I guess is tied to Osoha Ish,
Yes.
the Russian New Year was specifically meticulously by Stalin and the likes of, like, they rid any sort of religious elements from it. There's no Santa Claus, there's Ded Moroz, which I guess translates to Grandpa Frost, who goes and delivers presents, but not God. Not God. It's not coming from God.
And it's January 1st or different?
It happens to be on January 1st. So my question is that an idolatrous holiday?
Yeah, it's so interesting that Stalin really tried to uproot, religion. Although it's interesting, as a young person, he was studying to be a priest. By the way, Stalin, interestingly enough, really was a split personality. He was an extremely intellectual person. He was very, very well read. Shakespeare, everything. He happened to be a brute, a psychotic brute at the same time. But, if you compare him to Hitler or any of these other guys, Stalin was head and shoulders in intellect above everybody. But for whatever reason, in addition to his brutality, he developed, of course it's all connected, a tremendous hatred for religion. Ad kedei kach, that he tried to uproot the 7-day work week, because he didn't want the concept of Shabbos. So he tried, but he knew people needed a break, so he tried to go to a 10-day work week. You work for 9 days and you rest the 10th day, and it didn't work. Somehow psychologically within everybody's neshama, you got to have a break on a 7th day, whatever the 7th day was. So you're telling me that Stalin tried to do the same thing, or did actually, apparently it's observed still. He tried to create a totally secular idea of New Year, totally divorced from any type of religious symbolism, not connected to Yashka, not connected to Christianity in any way. So the question, and apparently it still became so this is a legacy of Stalin that people still hold on to. So the question becomes, is it permitted for a Russian person of Russian origin to celebrate the Russian New Year, since it was carefully structured to have nothing to do with any type of religion? So first, I think there's a general problem. Should I imitate anything that Stalin did? That may be a separate avera in and of itself. But I think you got a problem that maybe in Russia you could do it that way, but given the fact that you're in a place if you were to tell me you did it a different day, maybe your svara would be valid. But if you're doing it the same day as everybody else, and that day has a religious significance among a lot of people, I think by definition there's a problem of appearances there. By the way, even in Russia, I suspect, I know that during Stalin, besides Chabad and Breslov that were maintaining Yiddishkeit, even in Stalinist Russia, there were many, many devout Christians who were maintaining Eastern rites in Russia. So the emes is, I'm assuming that even in Russia, a lot of people considered January 1st to be a religious holiday as well. But either way, whatever you could have done in Russia, I think would not apply outside of that. Yeah.
So this was Parsha Vayikhi. Yaakov says when Yosef brings his children Menashe and Efrayim to him to get a bracha, Yaakov replies, "Who are these?" Meaning, like, who are these children that you're bringing in front of him? We know he was blind and whatever, but Rashi also explains that Yaakov saw prophetically that there would be wicked kings that would descend from the children of Ephraim and Menashe. And so his question was, who are these? Meaning, like, whom were they born to that could have such wicked children later down the line? So my two questions on that is, one, let's say they were born to someone that was not righteous or whatever. Would he have withheld the bracha from them? And also the second thing is, his other children, there were also descended from them wicked people, but he still blessed them. So I'm confused on why he asked, who are these that they're going to have wicked descendants, and like, why should I bless them almost?
Yeah, so the question becomes that when Yaakov sees Ephraim and Menashe in front of him, and he asks, who are they? Right? So the question is, why was he asking, who are they? Can't he see who they are? So simple pshat is, he was blind, maybe he didn't see it so clearly. But Rashi says that Yaakov is gazing into the future. And Yaakov sees that from Ephraim and Menashe will come some of the kings of the 10 tribes who are not going to be righteous. And Yaakov is astounded. Like, who are these people in front of me that could produce such evil people? So the question that's being asked is, was Yaakov kind of suggesting that he wasn't going to give a bracha because of that? And if that's the case, I mean, there are Rishoyim who came from other tribes as well. Did Yaakov see them? And if he did see them, why didn't he have the same response? If he didn't see them, why didn't he see them if he saw Ephraim and Menashe? So those are good questions. I would say this. I would think that, number one, given the fact that in Yaakov's eyes, Yosef is the greatest of the tzaddikim. And you see this, that Yosef, who survived these 22 years, so Yaakov understands that from any person can come Rishoyim or tzaddikim. So Yaakov is not fazed by the fact that maybe the other sons will occasionally have descendants that are not righteous. But he just cannot believe that from Yosef would come Rishoyim, because Yosef represents the epitome of perfection and righteousness. So his surprise is much, much greater with Ephraim and Menashe than it would be with the others. Now, in terms of would he withhold the bracha, almost certainly not. He was going to give the bracha. In fact, he did give the bracha, right? He was going to give the bracha one way or the other. But you have to understand that when you're a Yaakov Avinu, you have to calibrate your bracha based on what you see. So when he sees a shocking thing, he has to then recalibrate what bracha would be appropriate to deal with that type of contingency. Okay, so it's kind of, whoa, I got to do something new here, I got to readjust. So the most you could say is that maybe hypothetically, I don't know what he would have said, he would have perhaps given a different bracha had he not had this particular information.
And it says he lost his prophecy after that? It says he lost his prophecy?
Well, temporarily. The reason was because it was such a shock to him. It was a shock to his fundamental understanding, ad kedei kach, that he felt he lost his connection to Hashem. He just wasn't getting it. I don't get it. It doesn't compute. Yosef is in Mitzrayim for 22 years, and Yosef remains pure and righteous. I don't understand how Rishoyim could come out of that situation. So that confusion causes you to lose your Ruach HaKodesh. Yeah.
If I, let's say if the rabbis hold a halacha that's contingent on a fact, like you can't eat this food with that food in an interval of 30 minutes because the taste will transfer, and then I scientifically falsify that statement, do I still hold the halacha?
Yeah, this is actually an excellent, excellent question that one can write a whole sefer on, and people have written whole sforim on, and that is the impact of science on halachos that depend on certain scientific assumptions that are proven to be untrue. So the example that you gave is, in the laws of kashrus, right, the idea that you can't use a treif pot, right, a pot that you cooked pork in, you can't use to cook something else in, because the idea is the pot absorbs taste from the pork and then imparts, right, that's the all of kashrus is based on this edifice. It then imparts treif into the food. Now, it's been shown, I'm just amplifying your question again, that stainless steel actually is non-absorbent. They've done chemical tests to show that it does not absorb. So would that mean, therefore, that I can use a treif? Technically, it's not treif. Can I use a pot, stainless steel, in which non-kosher food was cooked? Because there's literally no absorption that goes in. Or let me give you another example. The Gemara says that you are allowed to kill a louse, lice, on Shabbos, because the prohibition of killing is only on creatures that produce sexually through a zachor and nekeva, and lice are created through spontaneous generation of rotting food. And therefore, since they are created through spontaneous generation, there is no issue of killing them. This is what the Gemara says. Problem is that it was now spontaneous generation was a very common belief. It was a very common belief in the ancient world that decaying matter could produce life. But scientifically, it's been proven that that's not true, that when you see, for example, you leave food to spoil and you see insects around it, they didn't come out of the food, but rather some insects were attracted and hatched eggs, etc. So the question becomes, does that change the halacha? Meaning, now that I know that there is a Mr. and Mrs. Lice in there that are producing children, should that be usher? So the common denominator in those questions is that the halacha was based on a scientific predicate, and the scientific predicate has been shown to be false. Do you still keep the halacha and the like? So that is a huge, huge machlokas. There are those who take the position that if the halacha was based on a scientific assumption, if that assumption is negated, the halacha does change, which means you're not allowed to kill the louse. And in the case of stainless steel, you would be allowed to cook in such a pot. However, Rav Dessler has a whole arichos about this. Rav Dessler has an arichos in which he says, it's more of a mystical idea of halacha, in which he says, halacha has many, many reasons that even go beyond the stated reason that Chazal gave. Chazal did not give us every reason for a halacha, and it may even be, this is a chiddush, that they weren't even aware of every reason. And therefore, even if the reason doesn't seem to apply, the halacha has its own momentum, the halacha has its own structural integrity that does not get affected. Meaning, but this depends on really Kabbalistic ideas, that Chazal get it right even when they get it wrong. I mean, that's what Rav Dessler is saying, that even when the reason they gave happens not to be the correct reason, their conclusion is correct. It's actually reminiscent of a very famous story involving Rav Chaim Soloveitchik. Rav Chaim Soloveitchik, Rav Chaim Brisker, the Rav of Brisk, was known for his deep, deep, deep analytical thinking. In fact, the whole derech of Ian in yeshivos comes from Rav Chaim. Rav Chaim was very, very deep. Rav Chaim didn't like to paskin halacha for various reasons. He did not like to paskin shilas. And the posek of the generation was a man called Rav Yitzchak Elchanan Spector. Rav Yitzchak Elchanan Spector, YU, is named after Rav Yitzchak Yeshivas Rabbeinu Yitzchak Elchanan. Yitzchak Elchanan was the posek hador, and a very, very eminent posek hador. He was also the askan. He was also really the leader of Russian Jewry in every sense. So Rav Chaim, imagine, who would Rav Chaim ask shilas to, right? So Rav Chaim would ask shilas to Rav Yitzchak Elchanan. And legend has it, these things may be legends, I'm not sure, that when he would tell you Yitzchak Elchanan, he would say, just tell me usher, mutter, please don't give me any reasons. He says, I don't want you to explain your psak. What's the explanation? because you give me a reason, I'm probably going to argue with the reason. Because Rav Chaim was, a very, very deep thinker. But I know that your answer is right, even if I don't like your reason. Because if you are the posek of our generation, Hashem is going to guide you to the pathway of truth, even though you yourself don't know the road that brought you to that pathway of truth. Quite amazing. As Rav Chaim said, you're right, even if your reason is wrong, because Hashem is going to give you the right answer. So Rav Dessler seems to say that that's how that works with the science, meaning halacha has reasons that are beyond the stated reasons. It's a difficult svara to deal with because according to that, it would almost be impossible to draw analogies in halacha because we often draw analogies, we extrapolate one halacha from the reason given for a halacha. But if you're telling me the halacha is not dependent on that reason, then how do you draw an analogy based on that reason if that reason is not the source of the binding nature of the halacha? So that's a bit of a problem, but your question is very, very excellent. The question becomes like nobody wants to be an innovator, at least within responsible halachic leadership. And that is, you're not going to find rabbis saying, oh, you can use stainless steel pots without koshering them, because we know scientifically they don't absorb. It happens to be true, but nobody wants to kind of break down the fences. So there's this inborn conservatism within the halachic process. Yeah.
Here's another send-in. How should baal teshuva and gerim react to discrimination in the frum world in almost all areas, as well as condescending behavior directed towards us, when in the secular community people don't seem to be so arrogant and unthoughtful?
Yeah, so obviously this is a question that comes from personal pain. The question was asked, how should a ger or a baal teshuva react to discrimination or condescending or insulting behavior from within the Orthodox community, especially when they don't encounter those types of discriminations in the less religious or the secular communities? And how does one react to that? Well, obviously, as I say, the question is coming from personal experiences, and all I can say is I commiserate, and I say that the Torah says in more than 30 places that you are not allowed to humiliate or look down at a person who converted to Judaism, and in terms of a baal teshuva as well, the Torah prohibits any type of shame or embarrassment. In point of fact, if a person has decided to choose Judaism, that's a point of pride. That is not a point of any type of denigration, and a baal teshuva is the same way. So all I can say is, somebody once said that the biggest mistake people can make is to judge Judaism by the behavior of Jews. And that is, we're not perfect. Even people who are frum and shomer mitzvos, maybe especially so. We make mistakes. We're not always sensitive. We're not always understanding. That is a flaw. That is something we have to work on. I can't ask mechira for what somebody else did, but in a sense, I will ask mechira from the person on behalf of the community, although I don't have that authority per se, for any type of hurt or embarrassment. And all I can say is I would hope that the person would not throw away the baby with the bathwater. The fact that there may have been some unpleasant experiences, I hope overall the person will see the beauty of Torah, the beauty of Judaism, and the fact that, people are better than the worst thing that they've done. So I hope that your interactions with Jews have also been, with religious Jews, have also been positive. But again, I'm not going to give a justification for people's behavior. People sometimes act in an insensitive way. Yeah, that's the reality of life. Yeah.
It said in Vayechi that Yaakov didn't pass away spiritually, only physically. Is there anywhere that in the psukim that it's alluded to that he remained spiritually in the world?
Yeah. So this is referring to the famous teaching of the Gemara that says Yaakov Avinu did not die. So the Gemara says, what do you mean Yaakov Avinu did not die? The Chumash says he died and he was embalmed. Who did they embalm if he didn't die? So the basic answer is that spiritually, he didn't die. And it's based on the notion, really, and it's not just Yaakov, that's the thing. Once the Gemara turns it into a spiritual thing, it is not really unique to Yaakov. It refers to righteous people. That righteous people endure spiritually forever. Number one, because their soul is with God and their soul never dies. And number two, the goodness they did in this world continues to live after them. Either their children, their students, the society they influenced, and the like. So once we move from physical to spiritual, we're not limited to Yaakov anymore. Right? So the Gemara, this is a teaching in the Talmud. The Talmud basically says that tzadikim, even in their death, are considered to be living people. And one of the proofs is that Olam Haba, the world to come, is called Eretz Chaim, the land of true life. And therefore that is the eternal life that we have. Yeah.
It said that you can't gain from an idol. So first of all, if I consume...
I'm sorry, you can't what? Didn't hear you.
Gain from an idol.
Yes.
So if I consume entertainment that has Greek gods in it, am I committing idolatry? And what if I, in terms of statues, commission a statue of George Washington, or just go to and visit and enjoy a statue of George Washington?
Okay, so the question, what was the first thing you said, though, about...
benefiting the form of consuming entertainment with, Greek gods, for example.
Yes.
Entertainment.
Yeah. So the question is, you're not allowed, not only are you prohibited from worshiping an idol, that's for sure, but you're even not allowed to get benefit and enjoyment from an idol, right? That's a separate halacha. Isser hana, you cannot get benefit. So the question becomes, what about entertainment that involves the Greek gods, or I commission a statue of George Washington or the like? So let me explain point. Point number one is, the term idol does not just mean a statue. It means an object that was worshipped as a god. So if the object was not worshipped as a god, then it is not osur bahana, it is actually mutter bahana. Now, the other thing is about Greek. Now, the Greek things were worshipped as gods. Jupiter's, or not Jupiter, Zeus, and all of these guys. So Rav Moshe Feinstein has an interesting tshuva. And again, I'll go back to my childhood. Maybe you had it. I don't know if they still teach this even in public schools. But Greek mythology used to be a big subject. I don't know, for some reason, I don't know why exactly, but everybody learned, we didn't learn Midrashim necessarily, but we learned Greek mythology, all about all of these guys. Kind of very dysfunctional gods. They weren't too interested in morality. I mean, to talk about Zeus caring about morality, he was not that interested in that. So someone asked Rav Moshe, are you allowed to teach in schools Greek myths? Because you're really reading about Avodah Zorah. It's Avodah Zorah. These were worshipped. So Rav Moshe said a very interesting chiluk. Rav Moshe said that once a religion has been so discarded that nobody in the world believes in it, it's no longer Avodah Zarah, you see? So there's a very big difference between reading Greek mythology and reading the New Testament. I read the New Testament, I'm dealing with a religion that still has millions and millions of adherents. So God forbid I might be influenced, God forbid, to follow in that path. So we tell a person, keep away from Christian stuff. But to keep away from Greek mythology, hey, I'm going to become a Zeus worshiper, I'm going to worship Mars, or whatever the Greek, and Mars is the Roman name, whatever the Greek name was. So Rav Moshe actually talked about the idea that at some point, things that used to be Avodah Zarah more or less become extinct. And we no longer have to, he says it's shtus, he wasn't advocating teaching it, but he said it's not Avodah Zarah and the like. So the Greek God thing is not a big problem. Now, however, there's another branch of halacha, which you didn't allude to in your question, a totally different branch of halacha, that Jews generally should not make or own statues of human beings. Meaning this is independent of idolatry. And this is even an issue theoretically with children having dolls, human, dolls and the like. And some people are very, very machmir. They will not allow any human, representation of a human being, whether it's a figurine. Now, this is not a painting. We're talking about three-dimensional. A three-dimensional figurine, a statue. So even a doll, unless they mutilate it, like cut off a little tip of the nose or something like that. So there is a makom to be machmer on those statues. But on the other hand, some say if they're not objects that are commonly worshipped, you can be lenient on that too. So there is a makom to be lenient, but there is a makom to be machmer. You know, the Chafetz Chaim had a daughter in his old age from his second marriage. She was the last child of the Chafetz Chaim. She only died a few years ago. Rebbetzin Zaks, her husband was Reb Menachem Zaks, a Chashuv Talmud Chacham. So towards the end of her life, she was reminiscing about her father. So she told different stories. Very, very fascinating to have a little girl, talk about what it was like to be, a young daughter of the Chafetz Chaim who was already very advanced age. Let me digress for a moment. And she described that he was a very, very undemanding father when it came to kavod. He did not demand kavod. You could sit in his chair, none of that mattered to him. But what was very important to him was that you don't lie. Whatever you say, you have to tell the truth. So she mentioned the story that when the Mishnah Brewers came from the printer, so sometimes in a printed book there are blank pages. So you got to leaf through the book to see if there's blank pages, so you return them. So the Chafetz Chaim would not want to sell a sefer to someone that had blank pages. So he gave his 10-year-old daughter the job, just flip through to see if there's any blank pages. Just flip through it. So we had 10 sets of Mishnah Brura that he wanted her to go through. So that would be 60 volumes. Each volume takes like a minute, but 60 volumes. So it would take her an hour to do it. So she was running out to play. I don't know where in Radin you go out to play, but she was running out to play, and she said, "Can't do it now." Telling her, "Can't do it now. When I get home, I'll do 100 sets." So she comes home, and 2 hours later, and on the table there are 600 volumes of Mishnah Brura. That's 100 sets. So she says, "Abba, you only wanted me to do 10 sets before. Now it's like 10 times that." He says, "You said 100 sets? You don't lie. Whatever comes out of your mouth, you have to listen to." So he said, my father was very, very makbid that everything has to be emes. So she had to go through 600 volumes. So sometimes, she said, the pressure was so much that she needed to get away from her father because he was like too righteous, So she needed a place where he couldn't go. So she used to go into the cemetery. The Chafetz Chaim was a Kohen. A Bas Kohen could go into a cemetery, but her father couldn't get her in the Beis HaKvaros, so she used to go to the cemetery. Now, the reason I'm bringing it up is that one time, a relative in America sent her a doll. And she was so excited to have a doll from America. And the Chafetz Chaim said, "Could I see the doll for a minute?" And he picked up the doll. He took a knife and cut off the tip of the nose. "Oh, but what did you do? You ruined my doll." He says, "You have to do that." So the Chafetz Chaim was actually machmer on this, but lemaisa, many poskim are mekel, and they say as long as it's not an object like yashka that's used for avodah zarah, we could be mekel. So the George Washington thing is not going to be a problem. Yeah.
When you were talking about Christmas, you said something about Thanksgiving not being good. I was wondering what that was.
Yeah, Thanksgiving, on one hand, Thanksgiving is kind of, on one level, a very good opportunity because, obviously if you're a ger or your father is not Jewish, so they may celebrate Christmas, but Easter even, and you can't do that. You can't celebrate those avodah zarah holidays. So for many people, Thanksgiving is sometimes the parav alternative in which, hey, it's not religious, and therefore I can get together with the family, Thanksgiving. But in truth, there's a big machlokus about that. Again, we tend to be lenient because this allows family unification. But some say ultimately Thanksgiving is based on religious ideas, and the pilgrims, or whoever started it, certainly they had in mind, the God that they pray to, etc. So some do say a religious Jew should not celebrate Thanksgiving, And probably that's the prevailing psak in Eretz Yisrael, which Thanksgiving is not a big deal here anyway, but the typical Eretz Yisrael posek or Rosh Hashiva will say to an American student, you should not celebrate Thanksgiving. But I will tell you that there is a makam to be makel, Rav Soloveitchik, Rav Moshe, etc. They did permit the celebration of Thanksgiving, but there were certain limitations. Rav Moshe was against, actually Rav Moshe was stricter. I misspoke a moment ago. Rav Soloveitchik had a full Thanksgiving meal. He used to end his shir early. He gave shir in New York. He lived in Boston, at least for weekends. Thanksgiving, he gave his share early in the morning so he could get back to Boston in time for Thanksgiving dinner. So Rav Soloveitchik observed a full Thanksgiving. Rav Moshe was a little reluctant to have a meal in honor of Thanksgiving, but he permitted families to come together simply because they weren't working that day, so they can come together. With turkey, some have suggested, some are machmir, they will not have turkey on Thanksgiving, but they will serve the turkey the Shabbos after Thanksgiving. They'll do it in honor of Shabbos. So, but still, as I say, the reason why I myself am inclined to be mekel is that for balei teshuva, or people who come from non-religious families, Thanksgiving is one of the few occasions where they can get together with their family. So in such a situation, I think I would rely on Rav Soloveitchik and be lenient, but there is a makam in halacha to be strict on it. Yeah.
How does the Rav view symptomatic disorders in halacha? So, like, for example, let's say somebody has a symptomatic disorder that they always feel nauseous. Like on Shabbos, would they have like the heter of, let's say, taking medicine to the extent that they would be uncomfortable, that they would have to be in bed the whole day? So, I mean, but from a psychological standpoint, there's nothing really wrong with them. Or, for example, there are certain people that they always feel they need to go to the bathroom. So, like, does that mean they can never make a bracha, even though psychologically they don't really need it? I mean, it's just a symptomatic issue. So, like, what?
So the question is, how do we view kind of symptomatic conditions that are not real physical conditions, but certain feelings that a person has? A person always has to go to the bathroom. A person is always nauseous. Now, normally, if you have to go to the bathroom, you're not supposed to daven or put on tefillin until you relieve yourself. But if you're a person that has to go or feels they have to go every 5 minutes, that may make davening impossible in such a situation. It's hard to answer it in the abstract. I would say this: at some point, a person has to differentiate between perception and reality, and sometimes it's a trial and error type of judgment, and you're not sure. Meaning, if I feel I have to go to the bathroom, when do I really have to go? Meaning, if I went into the bathroom now, would something come out, or would something not come out? And at some point, you try to ascertain the reality of the situation, and if nothing's really going to come out, then in such a situation, you ignore symptoms. Meaning, the symptoms are not the inherent reality; they are simply the warning, the alerting signs of a reality. But when it's a false alert, you technically don't have to pay attention to it. Now, with respect to nausea, that's kind of a different situation, because the Isser D'Rabbanan of taking refuah on Shabbos does not apply if a person is so debilitated that they can't stand up, etc. Now there, I think perception does become reality, meaning it makes no difference if it's in my head or it's physical. If lemaisa, I'm in a state where I'm not able to function, I would certainly be allowed to take refuah. So with respect to certain halachos, the perception of symptoms is the same as a reality. For respect to other conditions, the perception and the reality are two different things. So it very much depends on every particular context that you're dealing with. Yeah.
Based on that question, what about something like ADHD?
I'm sorry, say it again?
Based on that question, what about something like ADHD?
You're talking about on Shabbos? Yeah, so this is a very good question. A person has ADHD, certain deficit disorders, hard to concentrate, so they need to take Ritalin or whatever, some type of analogous medication. Without that, they either space out or become hyperactive or can't learn or daven properly. Are they allowed to continue with that medication on Shabbos? It is a good question. The bottom line is that if you have a regular course of treatment that you take it every day, you can take it on Shabbos. But if indeed you don't take it every day, it's better not to take it on Shabbos. But if it's an everyday thing, we're making on it. Yeah.
If a person was going to be executed by the Vatican, and during the process of execution they escaped, they're considered a dead man walking.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Does that person have to keep any mitzvos?
Very excellent question. There is a principle in Judaism that, now it's important that you differentiate two situations. If I desecrate Shabbos, even if I was warned not to do so, and I could be convicted of death penalty by the Beis Din, until I am convicted, I am alive. And if somebody killed me, they would be guilty of murder. So I'm not a dead man from the time I violated Shabbos or murdered. But there is another principle that says, once I have been sentenced to death by the Beis Din, meaning the witnesses have come and the Beis Din has sentenced me to death, even if, now normally there's a very speedy execution within 24 hours, but if I somehow escaped, at that point, halachically, I am a dead man. Once there's Gemar Din, I am called Gavra Ketila, a dead man, and if somebody were to kill me, they would not, even if they didn't know that I was convicted of murder, they would not be guilty of murder because they killed a dead man. Right? That's the principle. So the question is, do you get the advantages of being dead? Meaning to say, hey, I'm dead. You know? So I can have a cheeseburger, I can have right? Dead men can have cheeseburgers, right? So I can violate the Torah because the Torah only applies to people who are halachically alive. Does my wife need a get? Am I still married? Or, I'm a dead man. My wife could marry my next door neighbor. That may be the downside. The answer is, you're still chayav in mitzvos, but I don't know why. I have to think about why that should be so. L'maisa, we apply this notion that you're the walking dead really for only one purpose, that someone who kills you is not guilty of murder. With all other respects, you're still alive, but logically you have a good question. I'm going to have to think about why we don't apply the logic to other areas. So I'll try to get back to you. Yeah.
In the mid-2000s, there was a machlokes over Shemitah between Rabbi Yashiv and several Sephardi rabbim. From what I understand, the Sephardi chief rabbinate tried to allow the sale of the land in Eretz Yisrael to Goyim in order to allow Jewish farmers to sell produce during Shemitah, but Rabbi Yashiv ushered this because a Jew can't sell land in Eretz Yisrael to Goyim. If this explanation is true, how could the Sephardi rabbim rationalize this heter mechira over an explicit avera in order to supersede Shemitah?
Yeah, so the question that you're alluding to the infamous or the famous heter mechira, machlokas, you described it as a machlokas between the Sephardic chief rabbi and Rabbi Yashiv. Let me point out, this goes back much earlier. This goes back to the time of Rav Kook, actually even earlier than that, but it really came out very strongly in Rav Kook's time in the early part of the 20th century. So this is not at all a new machlokas. When Rav Kook was, even before he was chief rabbi, when he was Rav of Yaffa, so Rav Kook lived at a time in Eretz Yisrael where the poverty was unbelievable. And literally, people were dropping dead in the street of starvation. And this is under normal conditions, the normal years. So now comes Shemitah, where you're not allowed to farm, you're not allowed to produce anything. Rav Kook considered that to be karov lepikuach nefesh. So Rav Kook divided, and again, I don't want to get hate mail. This Rav Kook is not the first one. I know Rav Kook is not the first one, but Rav Kook is the great popularizer. He wrote a whole sefer on it. So Rav Kook developed the idea that if the land is sold to non-Jews, it does not have the holiness of Eretz Yisrael, and the laws of Shemitah will not apply. And by analogy to chametz that you sell to a goy, the land was sold to a goy with the intention that he would give it back, and that would allow Jewish farmers to work the lands and have what to live on during Shemitah. This is called the heter mechira. And since Rav Kook, the Rabbanut does a heter mechira every 7 years. In fact, you will see, if you remember, you don't see it now anymore, but there was Shemitah, you'll see that products are marked heter mechira, if they are, right? And it depends on the neighborhood. So in a Haredi neighborhood, like say Osam, right? Osam makes potato chips, right? So there are potato chips that were based on the heter mechira and potato chips that are not based on heter mechira. So if you go to the airport or Tel Aviv, Osam would dump the heter mechira stuff there. In Haredi neighborhoods, they sold the other part. They would target where they would sell this, or that. So the Rabbanut has relied on the heter mechira ever since Rav Kook. So it's been more than 100 years of heter mechira, before the state of Israel. Now, many have argued that the Rabbanut's use of heter mechira today is not appropriate. Rav Kook mattered heter mechira because of conditions of mass starvation. If Rav Kook would be alive today, where food is easily importable, from the European Union or from the United States, you don't have the same issue of starvation that you had then. Okay, putting that aside. But even in Rav Kook's time, there were many, many people that were absolutely against the heter mechira, and one of the arguments was there's an iser d'oraisa to sell land in Eretz Yisrael to a non-Jew. This is a lav. Lo sechanem, do not give them a presence in the land. So how can you sell land to a guy? Then there are other reasons too. This would easily take 3 hours, but let's just take the one issue that you raised. Now let me put it this way: Rav Kook was not ignorant of this issue, and in Rav Kook's sefer called Shabbat Haaretz, he addresses it extensively. And Rav Kook says there are a number of reasons, thank you, why lo sechanem would not apply. According to some opinions, lo sechanem only applies to idolatrous non-Jews, such as maybe Christians. It does not apply to monotheistic non-Jews, such as Arabs. So there is something good about Arabs, meaning they happen to be Islamic Arabs. In other words, they happen to be monotheists. Number two, Rav Kook said, this was only a temporary transfer of ownership and not permanent, and the prohibition is only permanent. And number three, this is a sale that is for the benefit of the Jewish people. So you're not doing it to benefit the non-Jew, but to benefit the Jew. So Rav Kook addresses it, and Rav Kook gave heterim, and Gedolim like Rabbi Yashiv didn't accept the argument. So like anything else, it is a machlokes within halacha. So there is Rabbi Yashiv's point, and there's Rav Kook who gave counterpoints. So the heter mechira is a very, very, very controversial issue even today. Unfortunately, it's become a little politicized. I mean, there are people who treat heter mechira produce like worse than they would treat pork. I mean, they say, oh, pork, heter mechira, it's a machlokas and halacha. It's a machlokas haposkim. And there are poskim that allow it. In fact, Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, who himself did not advocate the heter mechira lechatchila, said, if you are invited to the house of a person who serves heter mechira produce, you are allowed to eat it. Which is interesting. You shouldn't buy it, you shouldn't patronize it, but you're allowed to eat it if it's served to you. You don't have to kind of jump out of the window or whatever it is. But as I say, the heter mechira has become politicized. It's become almost an emblem of Zionist versus not Zionist psak. So it got exaggerated way out of proportion. Okay, one more question. Yeah.
Am I allowed to work as a delivery driver and I deliver non-kosher food here and there?
So are you talking about in Israel, or? Okay. So the short answer is it really depends on who your clientele is. Meaning, if you were to be delivering them mainly to Jews, you should not take such a job. You should not deliver non-kosher food to Jews. But if, in fact, if a majority of your deliveries are to non-Jews, then even if occasionally you'll have a Jew, you are permitted to take that job. So you are permitted to deliver non-kosher food to people who are not obligated by the laws of kashrus.
Is it not considered benefiting from it?
So here's the interesting thing. There's no prohibition of benefiting from non-kosher food. In other words, there's a prohibition of eating non-kosher food. So you have to understand, some things you're not allowed to benefit from, and some things you're not allowed to eat, but you are allowed to benefit from. So, for example, chametz on Pesach. Chametz on Pesach, you're not allowed to even benefit from. But non-kosher food generally is mutter bahana, so you're permitted to do that. Yeah.
What about basar b'chol?
Yes, what about withheld? So it is true that even though pork or beef that was not shechted, I'm allowed to benefit from, as long as I don't eat it. But meat and milk that were cooked together, basar b'chalav, not only is there an isser of eating, there is also an isser to have benefit. So the question would be, if you're delivering products that contain meat and milk that were cooked together, they have to be cooked together, not just mixed together. So it's asr bahana, am I allowed to be a delivery? So the truth of the matter is, even then it's mutter. And the reason is, getting paid for a delivery service is not considered benefiting from the food. You're getting paid for your driving. See, if I were to make meat and milk and get paid for that, that would be benefiting from meat and milk. But if I'm delivering it, that is not called benefit because I'm being paid for my driving service. Okay, be well, thank you, and have a good Shabbos.